Hey, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here today. My name is James Fitzpatrick, and on behalf of Building America's Future, I'd like to welcome you to our ongoing America's Future Tour. This is a policy series launched late last year to address some of the most pressing and important issues of our time. The mission of Building America's Future is to inform and empower Americans to take ownership of our country's policy direction and demand that our government at all levels enact policy reforms to improve the lives of Americans and make America's future strong. Today, we are discussing unleashing American energy. As a thought leader on this topic, with deep experience in national security and international economic policy, we look forward to hearing from our special guest, Dave McCormick, on his perspective and how the U.S. should address this issue now and in the future. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Pennsylvania State Senator Ryan Allment for some remarks and the introduction of our special guest. Senator.
Thank you so much, and good morning. It's a privilege for me to be here, and Dave, to welcome you back to South Central Pennsylvania. Welcome to Harrisburg, and thank you so much for your leadership and your leadership in a whole host of issues, but particularly the topic that we're going to discuss here this morning on energy policy. As I've said on a number of occasions when I've had the opportunity to join you and introduce you, this is a consequential time in the history of this country. And it's a consequential time that requires consequential and decisive leadership. And certainly in this area that we're here to discuss today, in energy policy, this is a consequential time. And Senator Casey has proven himself over the time that he's been in the United States Senate to be a totally ineffective and inconsequential leader, certainly when it comes to energy policy. To the degree that he has engaged on energy policy, it has been to follow the reckless and failed leadership coming out of Washington, D.C., the reckless and failed leadership of the Biden administration. He's a follower. He's not a leader. And this moment in time requires leadership. We need an energy policy that prioritizes reliability and affordability. And it's not just the Senate Republican caucus, it's not just the energy industry, but our grid operator, PJM, has been raising this red flag over the last year, year and a half, saying we have significant concerns with the path that we're currently on with respect to energy policy. That should we not reverse course, we face the very real prospect of blackouts. Why is this? How did we get to this point, and how did we get to this point in a state like Pennsylvania, rich in abundant resources, rich with a supply of natural gas, blessed with a diverse energy portfolio? How did we get here? Well, it's primarily because of failed policy decisions that have been made in Washington, D.C., and have been made in other states throughout the country, in California, in New Jersey, in Illinois, in Maryland. And Senator Casey would continue to double down on those policies. What we are experiencing here today is an increase in the demand for electricity as we continue to encourage folks to pursue electrification, pursue purchasing or considering purchasing electric vehicles, appropriately settle data centers here in Pennsylvania, and promote emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. As we see the increase, and we are projecting a continued increase in the consumption of electricity, at that same time, we are prematurely retiring our most reliable power plants, baseload sources of electricity, not bringing natural gas online as we should, prematurely retiring nuclear power plants and coal power plants. The transition to clean energy, to alternative forms of energy, the technology is just not there to meet the demand. It's time to reverse course, and we need decisive leadership, we need visionary leadership, we need strong leadership in the energy space, and that's certainly Dave McCormick in the United States Senate. It's my privilege to introduce my friend Dave McCormick, who is a seventh-generation Pennsylvanian, born and raised in Washington, Pennsylvania, raised in Bloomsburg. I've had the opportunity to meet Dave's parents on a number of occasions, which was a real personal treat for me. He's a West Point graduate, as I like to refer, at the Citadel along the banks of the Hudson, or that lesser military college along the banks of the Hudson.
It never gets old. It never gets old for him.
Yeah, I like to joke about that. But Dave, when the country has called, time and time again, Dave McCormick has answered that call. Has served as a combat veteran, as a Bronze Star recipient. He's a Pennsylvania job creator and a business leader. And I'm particularly excited about his public policy expertise, the thoughtful leadership he's provided, and he will immediately give our Commonwealth a seat at the table in Washington, D.C. And most importantly, he's a devoted husband and father of 6 bright young women for whom he wants to preserve the American dream. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our next United States Senator, Dave McCormick.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Senator Rahman. I appreciate it. Thank you. A good friend and a great leader for Pennsylvania, so thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you to Building America's Future for hosting another great event. And thank you, Dave Taylor, for having the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association host this meeting today. Listen, I'm excited to be here because I think we're talking about probably the single most important thing to Pennsylvania's future. If you could wave a magic wand and say the one thing that could unlock the potential, the future of Pennsylvania, it would be smart energy policy that continued to ensure that America, but Pennsylvania, is an energy superpower. And that's what today's discussion is about. I had the opportunity to give a speech in Pittsburgh last week where I tried to lay out in very clear terms 2 paths. The path that we're currently on, which I think is taking us down a road to higher energy costs and more dependence on China, versus a path that I'm going to lay out in a minute, which ensures that we continue to be dominant in energy, but also have the huge economic benefits that comes with that, the national security benefits that comes with that, but also in a way that not only preserves but protects our environment. It's a false choice to think that we can't have all those things. There's no better place to talk about this than in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is blessed with natural resources, and it's always been the case. 1853, America's first oil refinery was built right here in Pennsylvania. And in Titusville, the first commercial successful oil well in 1861. And so this has been a touchstone for energy innovation throughout America's industrial history. And we've got this incredible supply of abundant, cheap energy that we need to take advantage of. And our current leadership in Washington, and in particular Senator Casey, has not led on this issue. And that's the reason I'm highlighting it, is because it's so important to Pennsylvania, and we've also failed. Senator Casey has failed to really be a leader on this. He's consistently voted against expanding oil and gas leases. He voted in lockstep with President Biden, as he tends to do 98% of the time, on the Keystone Pipeline. He supported the administration's announcement on not approving terminals to export natural gas to the world, a decision that ultimately will hurt America's security because our natural gas in the hands of our allies makes them less dependent on our adversaries. Casey championed a radical cap and trade policy that would have cost Pennsylvania consumers hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, and 500,000 jobs. He's consistently been in favor of taxing energy producers, and his clean power plan would have essentially driven up electricity rates by 50%. And all of this, I keep coming back to, this enormous push under President Biden for alternative sources of energy, which I'll come to in a minute, has made us enormously dependent on China for lithium batteries and solar panels at a time when China is our greatest adversary, at a time when we're trying to reduce our dependence on China in semiconductors and pharmaceuticals and other things. Bob Casey and Joe Biden have made us more successful, more dependent, rather. So these misguided decisions have really hurt Americans in 4 ways. They've driven up energy prices. They've undermined our national security efforts to be independent of China, to be able to help our allies like Ukraine in support, and Europe in support of Putin's aggression. They've hurt the environment because they've made America, or they've made foreign countries more dependent. They made America more dependent on foreign sources of oil. So at the same time, where we could be using our natural gas in Pennsylvania, which is a far cleaner energy source than oil from Nigeria or other parts of the world, we're importing at the same time we could be exporting our natural gas around the world. And finally, it's killing manufacturing jobs because these clean energy producers or clean energy alternatives are being manufactured in China. So these policies have failed in just about every way for Pennsylvanians. And so that's why I laid out a vision where our energy future, our energy leadership, being an energy superpower, depends on three big steps. The first step is to essentially unleash oil and gas production here at home. If Pennsylvania were a country, it'd be the fourth largest natural gas reserves in the world. It's shockingly blessed, and we simply have to take advantage of that. So we need the infrastructure. We need the pipeline. We need to be able to launch new LNG projects, and building that infrastructure is a huge challenge because of bureaucracy, because of red tape, because of a permitting process for pipelines that is anachronistic, to say the very least. It takes many, many years of bureaucracy and red tape and uncertainty. As a business guy who's run a couple companies, I know what a death to innovation and business uncertainty is, and we have that. There's no remediation process. There's no process of acceleration for permit approvals. There's huge barriers to LNG exporting facilities that could open up our natural gas opportunities to the world. And so we need to unleash oil and gas production here at home, and we need a senator that's going to fight for those kinds of reforms, permitting reform and elsewhere in Washington. The second thing we need to do is an embrace an all of the above energy approach. So I'm for all sources of energy, all sources of alternative energy. I'm particularly supportive of nuclear. There's a huge opportunity with smaller, much more cost-effective and much more productive modular reactors. The safety on this generation of nuclear technology is exceptional. And so there's a huge opportunity. We're already a major nuclear power here in Pennsylvania in terms of our nuclear capability. We need to build on that. We need to build on other sources of energy, solar and wind and others, but that needs to be done in a market-driven way. Right now, there's such enormous trillions of dollars of subsidies chasing these energy resources, energy alternatives, and it's distorting the economy, it's creating inflation, it's driving up the price of fuel, and it's ultimately displacing American workers. So I'm for all of the above, but I'm for all of the above is an energy mix that's driven by the market, driven by our consumers. And over the long term, the variable power provided by solar and wind will not be as sustainable as nuclear and gas. And that's an important realization to avoid the blackouts that Senator Ament was talking about. We should also embrace, we have great universities, great research here in Pennsylvania, carbon capture storage or other new technologies for lowering emissions. Those are places where those technologies, Pennsylvania is a place where those technologies should prosper, with universities like Carnegie Mellon and others that could be huge drivers. And so we have a real opportunity in all of the above energy sources. We just need to do that in a way that makes sense, keeps our energy costs low, and make sure that our consumers and our businesses are able to benefit from all the resources we do have. Finally, we need to leverage those bountiful resources in the world. And so by being an energy superpower, by ensuring that we export energy around the world, that gives us huge geopolitical strength. It allows us to supply our allies in Europe. It allows us to displace our adversaries as being the primary energy suppliers. Look what's happened with Ukraine. Look what happened with Europe when it was so dependent on Russian oil. We've offset much of that, or natural gas rather, we've offset much of that Russian natural gas with our ability to export, but the most recent pause by the Biden administration compromises that and puts that ability to support our allies at risk. So when the world is more dependent on America and America exports to the world, that's a source of huge strength. At the very same time that that's obvious, we're making ourselves more dependent on China. We have lithium here in the United States, but because of the same sort of permitting challenges and environmental regulations, we're not able to access it. So instead, we're buying lithium batteries from China at a time where we're transforming our economy and making it more dependent on electric vehicles and solar panels, when those solar panels and lithium batteries are primarily manufactured in China, not only at the expense of U.S. jobs, but at the expense of U.S. independence. This is such an obvious strategic miscalculation. at a time when, I've laid this out in other speeches, at a time when China is our greatest adversary, and a time when we need to show leadership and reduce our dependence, we're making ourselves more dependent. And so for all these reasons, we need a reset on our energy policy, new leadership that can lead it, and this need not come at the expense of the environment. This need not come at the expense of the environment. Pennsylvania is one of the most beautiful and bountiful states in the country, and we can advance all these efforts while reducing emissions. In fact, we've done that. We made huge strides in reducing carbon emissions as a country over the last 15 years. They're down by something like 16% at a time where our population, our economy has grown. And that's because, among other things, but particularly because of natural gas. And by exporting our natural gas to the world, we can offset and replace some of the less or more carbon-intensive uses of energy in China and India and places like that. So it's good for the environment, good for our security, good for the economy. And so for all those reasons, I'm trying to make sure that Pennsylvanians know there's a contrast between the leadership I'll show on energy and the leadership that Bob Casey has failed to show on energy. And I have 3 questions for the senator, which I'll continue to ask him, and hopefully at some point I'll get an answer, which is whether Senator Casey will oppose President Biden's stated goal of removing fossil fuels from the power sector, which would inevitably raise energy prices for Pennsylvania consumers. That's my first question for the senator. My second question is, will he oppose President Biden's vehicle mandates, which put the jobs of manufacturers here in Pennsylvania and across the country at risk, particularly auto workers? And my third question for the senator is whether he'll support stop making America even more dependent on China with lithium batteries and solar panels. These are really important questions to the future of Pennsylvania and really important questions to the future of our country. And given, unfortunately, the senator's track record, I suspect he won't answer the questions because he won't want to show leadership on these important points. We need a senator who's going to show leadership. We need a senator who's going to ensure that Pennsylvania and America are energy superpowers. So I'm looking forward to our distinguished panel. Hopefully those remarks will frame our discussion a bit. And, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. This is not a political point. This topic, this agenda could not be more important. There's nothing more important to the well-being and the future of Pennsylvania than how we handle this very question. And so I'm delighted to be with you all today. Thank you.
Well, Dave, thank you very much for being here, and certainly welcome to all of our guests here at Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association today. I'm David Taylor, the president and CEO of PMA. We are the statewide not-for-profit organization that represents the people who make things. And here in Pennsylvania, manufacturing is $100 billion of value added every year. It's over 500,000 jobs on the plant floor, and that core manufacturing function sustains millions of additional Pennsylvania jobs in supply chains, distribution networks, and the vendors of industrial services. Manufacturing is the sector that adds the most value, and that's why manufacturing jobs have the best wages and benefits in the marketplace. These are family-sustaining jobs. Our manufacturers are also very significant local taxpayers in our communities across the Commonwealth. They're a significant part of the tax base, which then upholds the quality of life all across the Commonwealth. Manufacturing consumes large amounts of energy. In every way that matters, energy is life, and America's very high and rising level of energy consumption is a reflection of our very high and rising standard of living. And so it's because of all these things and the importance of energy to our industry and to Pennsylvania's future that we're very glad to host this forum today. I want to give my fellow panelists who haven't been identified yet the chance to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their expertise and why they're here.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Pam Whitmer. I'm with UGI Energy Services. UGI Energy Services is part of UGI Corporation. We're the oldest natural gas public utility in the country that started in Philadelphia. We still have an extremely large utility as part of our family of companies, UGI Utilities, which many of you are familiar with that name. Excuse me. And as I said, I'm with UGI Energy Services, the midstream and marketing company within the family. And so we take gas from the wellhead, move it to customers, whether or not that be a public utility or a electric generation facility, industrial consumers, and we also supply and market to those individuals as well. So I'm excited to be here to talk to you about energy, and I would be remiss to say that also that we have solar as part of our portfolio. We are truly, all of the above, as Mr. McCormick mentioned.
And Pam is too modest to mention she's also a former commissioner of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. Stephanie.
Thank you, Dave. Stephanie Wissman, Executive Director of API Pennsylvania, which is a division of the American Petroleum Institute, the only national trade organization that represents all segments of the natural gas and oil industry. So that includes exploration and production. It includes the transportation of the product, the refining of the product, and service and supply companies. We have approximately 600 members that occupy all of those segments. In addition to being an advocacy organization on behalf of our members, we're also a standard-setting organization. API was founded over 100 years ago as a standard-setting organization, and what that means is we publish and maintain 800 standards and recommended practices for the natural gas and oil industry, and they are sought out worldwide. These are the standards by which industry is measured. And we are actually incorporated by reference in several state regulatory agencies as well as federal agencies. So happy to be here and really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Stephanie. Neil.
Yeah, Neil Lesher. I'm Director of Government Affairs for the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. We're the largest broad-based business organization in the Commonwealth, representing about 10,000 businesses from all corners of the state. I guess I'll just say, we at the Chamber work every day to improve Pennsylvania's business climate, and I think we all know that there are areas that need dramatic improvement on that end. Our business tax structure continues to be wholly uncompetitive. We have workforce challenges in this state as the state continues to get older and we lose our younger folks to other states. Permitting is certainly continues to be a concern. But one of the things that Pennsylvania does have going for it is our energy sector. And so I certainly think that if we could fix those other things and not kneecap our energy sector, we really could become a state amongst nations and compete globally for job creation right here in Pennsylvania.
All right. Well, thanks very much again to all of my colleagues who are assembled here today to be part of the forum. And I'll take the privilege here of asking the first question. And Dave, I want to give a tighter focus to the theme that you started with. Can you elaborate on the importance of domestic energy production to national hard power and the importance of Pennsylvania's contribution to the national energy portfolio?
Yeah, thank you. My background is a national security background. So I served in the military. I went to West Point, and then I served in the White House in the National Security Council. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about our national security and the relationship with our allies and our adversaries. And the world's becoming an increasingly dangerous place. We have enormous threats coming from the Middle East, from Iran, who is an enormous energy producer and also underwriting terrorism around the world. We have enormous challenges with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the potential of instability in Europe, Russia being one of the predominant energy producers in the world. We have huge challenges with China, and the risk that China poses is probably our greatest adversary, an enormous energy producer, but also an enormous energy consumer in the world. And if you think about what ties the geopolitics together, the geopolitical map, energy. And as Senator Ahmed said, it's energy at a time where the demand for consumption is going up dramatically, not because of population growth, but because of the evolution of data and data technology and artificial intelligence, which creates huge demands for energy consumption, and is also an enormous source of geopolitical strain. Artificial intelligence is an enormous source. So artificial intelligence is dependent on having the energy to manage all the data, and energy is the driver of the global economy. And so for America, not to go on too long with my answer, but for America to have the capacity to be not only energy independent, so we're not dependent on anybody else in the world, we can still run our economy. We learned during COVID what it's like to be dependent on somebody else for semiconductors or pharmaceuticals as an example. Not only be energy independent, but to be energy dominant, to be an energy superpower which can provide energy to the world, both in terms of technological development of new technologies, but also in terms of being able to export natural gas and other and other capabilities around the world, that's of enormous benefit, enormous. It gives us strength, it gives us leverage, it gives us independence, it gives us the ability to support our allies, it gives us the ability to put additional pressure on our adversaries. And so, we're now in a world where how many tanks you have, or how many carriers you have is one consideration of strength, but probably not the most important one. Energy capability, energy superpower, energy independence, energy dominance, that, my friend, is the key to global power. And that's why it's so important.
Absolutely, and we've seen that in Germany, where German manufacturing was the heart of the European economy, and they became dependent on cheap natural gas from Russia. And again, Putin understands this, that the dictatorship in Moscow has deployed a fleet of nuclear reactors to power the domestic economy so that there's more of the oil and coal and natural gas that they can sell into the global market to bring back hard currency to his regime. And Dave, you alluded to this point, like maximizing American energy production and energy exports lowers the global price, and it literally defunds the Kremlin directly. It takes money right out of his wallet.
And ironically lowers global emissions.
Yes.
That's the thing that is the madness about the Biden policy. If the goal was to lower global emissions, the way to do that is to export more natural gas.
But that the Germans have crippled themselves now, that they're cut off from that Russian gas, and that's why they need resupply from America with new LNG terminals. So I'll just ask one more question, and then I want my other friends here to jump in. So, the U.S. flat out doesn't have enough infrastructure. Since 1977, there's been only one new oil refinery in the entire United States. It's in North Dakota. Well, of course, many others have been shuttered. We've only had, I think, one or two new nuclear reactors built since the 1970s. We don't have enough pipeline. We have this need for new LNG export terminals. How do we fix that?
Yeah. Well, this is, this would be a real focus for me as a senator, and as someone who's been a business person, I've had some experience on the other side of this. Business people need two things to be able to make investments. They need certainty. It's very hard to make huge capital investments in a regulatory environment where things are changing, because these are billions of dollars of investment that are required. So you need certainty that a regulatory framework is going to be there for you to you can recoup the investments you made. That's one thing. The second thing is the labyrinth approval process to actually get a permit for a pipeline or a new LNG project. It's years and years. And as I said in my remarks, there's no mechanism for accelerating it. There's no way for challenging the government's process. So it's intentional stonewalling. Let's call it for what it is. The bureaucracy is opposed to this development. The Biden administration is explicitly opposed. And so you need to actually have a mechanism by which you're able to accelerate that process. And if the government doesn't respond to an application in an adequate timeline, the project should go forward. There needs to be a way. And you think about the role of a senator from Pennsylvania. Part of the role is to hold the executive branch accountable. And these regulators are part of the executive branch. So this is a huge area of opportunity if you had someone in Washington that was fighting for the kind of reforms that it would ensure that these approvals are accelerated and there was regulatory certainty to allow for huge capital investment. That would unlock an enormous amount of investment in Pennsylvania, an enormous amount of production capacity that would benefit us in all the ways that we've described. I mean, you're more of an expert than I, but that's how I see it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with that. And just to throw a fact out there, I mean, it takes longer to get a permit from federal government than it does to get a 4-year college degree. I mean, it shouldn't be that way. 4.5 years average is what it takes to get an energy project permitted in this country, which is absolutely
I'm just hoping it's 4 years for my 6 daughters.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's what we're shooting for.
Yeah, no, exactly right. I mean, I cannot underscore enough the importance of permitting reform. And then that segues into getting more pipelines built in this country. And we'll probably touch on this a little bit more, but Pennsylvania being part of the Appalachia region here in the country, we really are at a bottleneck here with energy infrastructure. We've got a prolific amount of natural gas here in the Commonwealth, but public knowledge, many producers have announced over the last several weeks they are cutting back on production because there's not proper end use for natural gas. There's nowhere for it to go, not enough pipeline, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about LNG later, but that's another big piece of this.
If I could offer a real-life example, not just an anecdote, for working for a company that did try to site a pipeline, an interstate pipeline, and we took our case all the way to the United States Supreme Court. We won our case before the Supreme Court, but we still couldn't build our pipeline. After 6 years, we ended up having to cancel the pipeline. And while permitting reform is exceptionally important and absolutely necessary, there's also a need for legal reforms to go along with that, to stop the unending types of challenges
litigation
that come
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, it's tort reform that goes hand in hand.
And we know that we need more infrastructure, as we've talked about with the growth that is coming both in natural gas requests and also electric uses. And we know that New England is extremely pipeline constrained. We truck LNG into New England all the time.
And it's so infuriating. It was in, I think it was January of 2019, that there was a French-flagged tanker full of Russian LNG that docked in Boston Harbor. That's how the Bostonians get their natural gas, and it's like they would literally rather pay Vladimir Putin to kill baby seals while plundering the Arctic than to allow a pipeline a few hundred miles from Pennsylvania. It's insane, and especially when
that's good.
Well, it's the truth. It's the literal truth, and that most home heating in the New England states is home heating oil or wood stoves, both of which expel much more carbon than natural gas.
But, you know, part of the story, and both Dave and Stephanie mentioned this, touched on it. Part of the story that I think has been lost, hasn't talked about enough, has been the tremendous gains Pennsylvania has made with respect to carbon emissions as a result of the growth of this industry. And what I really appreciate about this conversation thus far is frankly how hopeful and optimistic you all are. And when I encounter a lot of young folks, because they're buying into a lot of what the left has been saying on these issues, is there's a lot of doom and gloom and pessimism and fear. The reality is that we can, in fact, maintain a diverse energy portfolio. We can maintain a reliable energy portfolio so that when you need the heat, when you need the light switch to turn on, regardless of weather, it will actually function, it will actually work. And we can do that in a way that is environmentally responsible, environmentally friendly, and in fact, make dramatic gains in terms of carbon emissions. And so I would love to hear Stephanie sort of talk maybe specifically about that, because I think this gets lost. And this is part of the story that we have to share. And Dave, maybe to follow up about how critical that is, maintaining the affordability, the reliability of the grid, the blessings that we have in terms of the diversity of the grid, and we can do it in an environmentally responsible manner.
And we are doing it. Yes, we are doing it in an environmentally responsible manner, for sure. But that's a great point, Senator, too, because it's because of natural gas in the electric generation space that we've been able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to generational lows. There is no doubt about that. That is the facts. I mean, you check any independent agency, they'll tell you the same thing. So the fact that natural gas, this is a good thing for our environment. And when you talk about decarbonization of industries that have a tough time in reducing their emissions, whether it's the steel industry, heavy manufacturing, cement, you know, they're going to need natural gas going forward. I mean, we cannot get to this transition without natural gas. Simply put, we cannot.
Well, and Senator, thank you, because the U.S. manufacturing is much more efficient and has a much smaller negative impact in the environment than production elsewhere. if you buy an item at a store that was made in China, that item is 3 to 4 times more carbon intensive than the same product made in the U.S. And so, you want to decarbonize the economy, we could buy American, and we can shift production from those countries that have low standards or no standards at all, and bring it to the place where you have the highest standards of workplace safety, worker protection, environmental protection, which is to produce here at home. And it's part of the challenge that we have really is one of, as you suggested, public understanding of the way the world actually works, that there's a degree of, I don't know what to call it, but fanaticism, and it endangers us. And in fact, I wanted to ask Neil to speak about one of the crises that we're facing now, which is the way that the governor of Michigan is attacking not just our prosperity and our security, but also our relations with our next door neighbor and most important trading partner.
Yeah, Dave's talking about the Line 5 pipeline issue, which has been in litigation for probably 5 years now.
What is Line 5?
Line 5 is a pipeline that brings oil and natural gas through Canada, through Michigan, and delivers 540,000 barrels of oil and natural gas throughout the Great Lakes region, which includes western Pennsylvania. And actually, very importantly, it also supplies the refinery that produces the aviation fuel for the Pittsburgh airport. So critical pipeline for western Pennsylvania and for our economy. We at the Chamber, back to Pam's point earlier about just kind of the endless litigation environment, we've been working not only with the U.S. Chamber, the Canadian Chamber, but also with the Chambers of Commerce of Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin on amicus work supporting the company in that case, arguing for a much more streamlined litigation process. There have been a lot of games that have been played in the state courts in Michigan, as the Whitmer administration, I thought.
Because this is a choke point. The governor wants to shut down the pipeline,
and
not because there's anything wrong with it, because something someday might go wrong with it.
Right, and there's too many games that get played with litigation, right? Like people try to find a favorable venue to file the lawsuit because they think they're going to get the outcome that they want. So what we've been doing is trying to get it removed to federal court where there's going to be a much more expeditious review. And I think that's an important point. I mean, it's the permitting process on the front end, but then also when there are disputes, there needs to be a streamlined process to work through those in a fair manner to both sides and just get to an outcome so that people can get an answer and move forward with the project or not move forward and move those dollars to another business venture.
So this is Canadian energy from Western Canada that goes through a pipeline, that goes through American waters, that then goes through Ontario, and then comes to Pennsylvania. So by having this interference that the governor of Michigan is attempting to stop Canadian energy from going from one part of Canada to another. So, and again, for absolutely no environmental benefit of any kind. We just, for sanity's sake, we need to have an honest conversation about these issues so people can understand what's really at stake.
What I think, David, too, I think we as Americans need to get to a point where we're all in this together. We talked about New England earlier, and if you look at the market prices, our fellow Americans who live in New England and do use natural gas to heat their homes are paying exponentially more than we as Pennsylvanians do. And we have Pennsylvania natural gas producers that would be willing to put more money back in their pockets, in the residents of Connecticut and Vermont and New Hampshire, put more money back in their pockets, which would really be beneficial right now with the inflation that everybody is experiencing. But we can't get a pipeline through New York to get the gas to them. So they're getting trucks of natural gas, which cost more money to transport that way. They're having foreign flagged ships pull into the port of Boston. And we could solve that problem very easily with a simple pipeline just to get Pennsylvania natural gas up to New York. But some people will not let it happen. And real Americans are being harmed by that.
And I don't understand how that's not a violation of the Constitution's Commerce Clause. I wish we had a U.S. Senator who would press that point. Are there any other
I wanted to make
comments
one
or
just comment
questions,
on
please?
what Senator Ahman said, because one of the things, it's a substantive matter, but also just of how we talk to people from across the spectrum, is to talk about national security, economic prosperity, and the environment is all goals that are of equal importance. So the environmental agenda we're talking about is not the afterthought. It's not the thing you say, and by the way, it's not bad for the environment. It's a genuine goal, a worthy goal, and there's some debate among some people in our party. I have acknowledged, I've written about this. I've said, listen, that needs to be, reducing carbon emissions needs to be an important goal because of the risk of climate change and all that goes with it. So we start with that, but then you say economic security, economic prosperity, and national security are all, and the false choice that we're being presented is these come at the expense of one another. And that's simply not true. And so and I think where the progressive left has really missed the boat is that there's an enormous economic cost that's being imposed. There's an enormous national security cost that's being imposed. And if it was having the clear environmental benefit, then at least their agenda they would be making the trade-offs that they are arguing for. But the great irony is that it's not achieving the goal in terms of carbon emissions either. So to me, this is one of those rare things where the policy of my opposition is so clearly bankrupt by any legitimate objective assessment, and it's doing great damage to the residents of Pennsylvania. And so that's why I think it's so important. And this isn't, this is a panel of experts, but this is why it's so important that we get energy policy back on track, because it's, again, the single thing we could do that could dramatically change the outcome of our Commonwealth.
Well, Dave, we've reached the end of our time. Final thoughts from you, sir.
Well, my first thought is I'm afraid I talk too much at the expense of not having others here speak, because there's so much more expertise. But my simple comment is just to reaffirm that energy is not only the most important issue in this Senate race. It's certainly one of the most important issues in the Senate race, but it is clearly one of the most, if not the most important issue for Pennsylvania over the next 10 years. We're blessed. We have a state that's uniquely blessed, but Pennsylvania is struggling. If you look at Pennsylvania compared to most states in the country, it's struggling demographically, it's struggling economically, it's struggling in terms of its competitiveness, many of the reasons you've said. This is the one thing, it's a clear shot, the one thing we could do that would dramatically change our trajectory in Pennsylvania. The one thing. And sadly, we're going in the opposite direction right now under the Biden administration. Sadly, I think the Democrats, in particular the progressive left, have this calculus deeply wrong for what's good for America and what's good for Pennsylvania. And so putting aside the Senate race, this is an area where we need to come together as Pennsylvanians and get us moving in the right direction. So I'm heartened by this great group of panelists and the fact that people are focusing on this, and I'll certainly try to do my part in making it a big focus for my campaign, but also for my time in the Senate.
Dave,
Thank you so much. Stephanie.
I would like to make a point here. So just to bring it all home, I guess, Pennsylvania, we have such a tremendous opportunity. We have a rich history of being a global energy leader. Take a look at, the hydraulic fracturing combined with horizontal drilling made it possible for us to develop our natural gas resources here in Pennsylvania. So, and that's about 15 years ago now, since we started producing natural gas. When you look at the jobs that are associated with this industry in Pennsylvania, over 423,000 jobs are linked and supported by the natural gas and oil industry in Pennsylvania. So to put that in perspective, that's 4 times the capacity of Penn State University's Beaver Stadium. That's how many jobs we're talking about today, but it could be so much more. And in order to sustain this, and we kept harping on permitting reform, that's an absolute must. It's an absolute must to get permitting reform done. Federal level first, but of course at the state level. There's another opportunity before us here in Pennsylvania. We are the only state that received monies for 2 hydrogen hubs here in Pennsylvania, to the tune of $6.1 billion is coming for the Arch 2 hub and the Match 2 hub in the southeast part of the state. But again, to get this right, we are going to need permitting reform. We're going to have to build out more energy infrastructure. But again, hydrogen is a key to this. And LNG was mentioned before, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the pause that was heard around the world. And that is when the Biden administration put a pause on new and existing applications for LNG, liquefied natural gas, export facilities here in the country. In the country. So what that means, and make no mistake, that is a signal that the United States is not open to LNG investment. And guess what? If we're not the ones building this resource, Qatar, Russia, and Iran are going to be doing that. So this is what is before us today, and that's why this LNG pause has got to be rescinded as soon as possible, because, again, it sends the wrong message to the world that we're not able to continue to supply our allies abroad with natural gas.
Yeah, there's great opportunity, but also the danger of great opportunity cost if we fail to capitalize on these opportunities. So, Dave, thanks again for being
Thank you
here.
all.
Thanks to everybody for being part of the forum today.
Thank you. Good job.